Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. For a show about game mastering, there are precious few episodes about how to be a game master. That ends now. Today, I set off again on the Obsidian Monolith to answer the question, how do I become a game master? In the second of my series of GM 101 episodes, I respond to your feedback and do my best to answer your questions about game mastering. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener. Greetings, fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 70 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith, somewhere outside time and space. First off, at the top of the show, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Steve Strickland, our Tier 5 patron. Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you all of the patrons of Star Walker Studios. You guys make this possible. So today I'm doing another GM 101 episode. I've gotten a lot of feedback from you about the last one, and if you're just now coming to the show and you want to listen to the first GM 101 episode, that's episode 68 of Game Master's Journey. And if you are new to the show, welcome to the show. So Game Master's Journey is a podcast where I talk about game mastering, and I try to keep it as system neutral as I can. But of course, naturally, I do tend to use games that I'm currently playing or running in my examples and in my discussions. So currently I'm running D&D 5th edition, and I'm playing in an Edge of the Empire Star Wars campaign. So this new series of episodes, the GM 101 episodes, is where I am trying to make a resource for anyone out there who is either a new GM or has decided to become a GM or is thinking about becoming a GM, or maybe you're just curious about it. So, I've had a lot of other GMs on the show talking about running games, and, that's really what this show is about. But I do tend to kind of focus on the game master's perspective, and I came to realize that I'm kind of giving the players out there short shrift because I'm just assuming that everybody's a game master already. So for those of you that aren't yet a game master, or maybe have just recently started running your own games, you probably have a lot of questions, and hopefully I can help with some of those questions. So on episode 68, I asked for feedback and I asked for questions and some illumination as far as what kind of topics you're interested in. And I got a lot of feedback. So I did have plans for this episode of what I was going to talk about, but I thought it would be a great idea to address the feedback first. So I'm going to try and get through it this episode. I don't know if I'll be able to or not. I'm going to keep it under an hour long. So if we get close to the hour mark and I'm not through the feedback, then I'll just have to get the rest of it next time. And then eventually get to what I was going to originally talk about. But that'll always be there. The most important thing is addressing the questions that you send in to me. So if you have any feedback about these episodes or anything about the show, or if you'd like to submit a topic or a question for Game Master's Journey, the best way to do so is to email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Another great way to get a hold of me is on the Game Master's Journey Google Plus community. So I will have a post for this episode up there. So that's a great place if you want to comment on the episode or ask a question for a future episode. Oh, and I almost forgot. I always forget to say this. One last thing before I get into the GM 101 stuff. if you're listening to my voice right now and you are a podcaster and you have a podcast, especially if it's a gaming podcast, something relevant to this show, I would love to hear from you. I would love to have you on the show. I would love to be on your show, get a little cross promotion action going. I listen to quite a few RPG podcasts myself, and if I haven't reached out to you to be on this show, it's probably because either you're on my list and I just haven't gotten to it yet, or maybe I don't know about your show or I haven't checked it out yet. So if you're listening to this and you make an RPG podcast and you'd like to be on Game Master's Journey, or you'd like me to be on your show, or best yet, both, shoot me an email, gamemastersjourney@gmail.com, and let me know. And if I'm not already listening to your show, I will definitely check it out. All right, so on to the GM 101. My first comment comes from Josh Van Meter, and I'm not sure where this, I didn't write down what this is coming from. I usually write it down, so I will assume he emailed me, but I don't know. So he says, Lex, love the episode. If I had one huge question about GMing, it would be how to handle session 0. What kinds of expectations do you need to set? How much input should DMs have in character creation? Essentially, how much do I need to communicate to the players to get everyone on the same page and adventuring without making it a drudgery? I love that this is the first question. I didn't do this intentionally. This is a little weird for me because I actually just last night, I had a failure with this myself. With one of my groups that I'm running, I failed to communicate certain things during session 0 that I should have, and it resulted in at least one player making a character that he later felt, once he understood what I was doing, might not fit what I was wanting to do real well. And that was definitely a failure on my part because, as a GM, it's kind of on you to let your players know what you're trying to do and what you expect from them and all that kind of stuff, right? So this is a definitely do as I say, not as I do kind of thing, which again, I talked about in episode 68. I talked about one of the reasons I haven't done this before, or the main reason, mainly being like I don't know that I'm, qualified, quote unquote, to tell you how to be a GM or how to be a better GM, because I'm not the best GM in the world. I'm not perfect. I make plenty of mistakes myself, case in point last night with session 0, but I'm not saying I'm an expert. I hope I've never come across as saying that I'm an expert, because I definitely don't think that I'm an expert. I have a lot to learn. I learn something pretty much every time I run a game. I learn something. I see something that I did that I wish I would have done differently, or something. So I'm learning here too. I'm learning not only from my own experiences at the gaming table, but also I learn a lot from you, from feedback that I get and comments that I get on the various episodes. I've learned a lot from doing this show. So maybe we can all learn a little bit from my mistake and my failure here with session 0. And it's interesting because one of the players that's in this game, which is a new D&D campaign that I just started, was also in my Star Wars game that I was running. And, he said that in the Star Wars game, I did a good job with session 0 with kind of letting everybody know what to expect. But with this game, not so much. So what happened exactly with my session 0? Well, I've been running a campaign online, my Thursday D&D game that I run and I stream and I put on YouTube. And we just a few weeks ago, we switched from, originally we were doing Tyranny of Dragons in D&D, and then we did Edge of the Empire for a few weeks. And then we switched back to D&D, but we went into my homebrew campaign of Primordia. I've talked a lot about Primordia in the world building episodes on this show, and I've posted a lot of information about the world in our forum on Roll20 for my online group. So this in-person group I have, which was also I was running Star Wars 4, and I decided I didn't want to run Star Wars anymore, and switched to D&D, which, by the way, I feel really bad about that, because we only played a few times, and I think everybody was pretty stoked about the campaign, myself included, at least originally. And I had some really cool ideas for it, and people had really cool characters. And then I kind of feel like out of the blue, I was like, I don't want to do Star Wars anymore. I want to do D&D. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That might even be a good topic for an episode, is, you know, why I made that decision, because it wasn't an easy decision to make. And I haven't had any complaints really from anyone, but I would not be surprised if at least some of my players weren't super happy about it. If I was one of them, I wouldn't have been super happy about it unless I just wasn't enjoying the campaign. But so let me know if you think that would be interesting, if you'd like to hear about that. I don't know if that would be interesting to people or not. So anyway, I switched gears on everybody, and I'm like, I'm gonna do D&D instead. And we had already a Google Plus community set up for the campaign for Star Wars, so I started posting stuff into there from my campaign notebook for Primordia, which I keep on OneNote. And a lot of this is the same stuff that I had put on my Roll20 forum for the other group. So I put stuff about the deities, about the world, all this stuff, and I meant to put in a post about the Adventurers Guild, which would tell the players what the Adventurers Guild was all about, and the conceit of this campaign is you're all going to be part of this. So, you know, keep that in mind when coming up with your character concept. Well, I completely spaced putting that up there because it was in a different section of the notebook than the other stuff, because I was in like my deities and settings section, and that was in like a separate section. And I completely didn't post it. And I thought I had. So I didn't realize that I hadn't shared that information. I thought we were all on the same page. And I told the players, you can make anything you want. And what I meant by that is you can make any race or class that's in the player's handbook that you want. They're all available. There aren't any restrictions as far as that goes. And even a lot of the extra stuff from like Unearthed Arcana, I allow. And I guess maybe if I had shared the Adventurer Guild stuff, then that would have like come across, like people would have realized, you know, also, you know, make a character that fits within the Adventurers Guild. But since I hadn't shared that information, me saying make whatever you want was interpreted as make whatever you want. So basically what happened is I went into this thinking everyone's going to be part of the Adventurers Guild. We're going to start out in the city of Alandria, but for the most part, adventures are going to involve going outside of the city, fighting monsters, exploring ruins, you know, that kind of stuff. So what happened was I had at least one player at the table make a character who was really built around the idea of we're going to be doing adventures in the city, and this is going to be like a city-based campaign. You know, again, going by the do whatever you want, right? And so everybody's making their characters, and it was towards the end of the session 0 character creation night when, you know, people pretty much had their characters nailed down at that point. And I asked everybody, you know, hey, what kind of things are you looking for from this campaign? Which I now realize that should have been the first thing I did that night. Before I had people start making characters, the first thing that should have happened was a discussion of what do you want from the campaign? Here's what I want from the campaign. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. And I didn't do that. So what happened was everybody had already made characters. And one of the players is like, well, I made this character that's all about being in the city, so I'd really like a lot of stuff going on in the city. And I had that kind of oh shit moment, like deer in headlights, because that was pretty much opposite of what I was thinking. I hadn't really planned anything for the campaign. But, you know, for me to do a good campaign in the city, like I feel like my city needs to be pretty fleshed out, right? Like I need to know what's all in the city. I need some organizations. I need lots of good NPCs, you know, and I don't have any of that stuff. Because again, you know, I've been thinking more like the city's just the home base and we're going other places to adventure. So I haven't spent a lot of time or energy really developing the city itself as far as like those kinds of details. And so I was kind of like, oh, well, and then that's when I explained, well, this is how the Adventurers Guild works. And, a lot of the stuff you're going to be doing with that is not going to be in the city, and so there was this kind of disconnect, right? And it wasn't until today, talking with one of the players and kind of going through the Google Plus stuff, that I realized that, oh my God, I never posted about the Adventurers Guild. And some of my players listen to the podcast, some of them don't. So, maybe the ones that were listening to the podcast were kind of like, they knew what was going on, but some of the others didn't, And so after they made their characters, I kind of spring this on them like, oh, by the way, yeah, we're not going to be in the city a whole lot. And so that was a problem, right? So as far as like looking back on, what I did and how I could have done better, obviously, sharing that post would have helped. But even so, I should have started session 0 at the very beginning and said, look, here are the parameters, right? This is what I'm thinking for the campaign. I'm thinking you're from the city of Elandria, which is a large city, something like Waterdeep in Forgotten Realms. So this allows you to play pretty much any race you want to play, because it could be there, to play pretty much any class you want to play, because it could be there. And that's the whole reason I started in a big city, because originally for my first campaign, I was thinking about starting in a little village or something. But then, I had players wanting to play like tieflings and Azamar and stuff like that. And I was like, well, that doesn't really make sense in that kind of setting where most of the people would probably be humans, or maybe all of them. So that's when I decided to instead do it in a big city. And then that way anything goes as far as races and classes and stuff. So what I should have done is explained, you're going to be part of the Adventurers Guild, and basically what they do is they go out in the wilds and hunt monsters that are threatening people. They go exploring ruins for lost magic items, lost knowledge, lost history, things like that. They protect the portals in the cities from anything outside that might try to invade or do damage or whatever. And they also, when required, will establish new portals in new cities that Elandria wants to trade with. So keep that in mind when you make a character. And also even like maybe some ideas of what kind of adventures I want to run. Like, I'm thinking mainly we're going to be running adventures outside of the city for the most part. It's probably going to be a mix of some good old-fashioned dungeon crawls and open world stuff and a lot of traveling and blah, 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 blah. That's what I should have done at the beginning of session 0. So to get back to Josh's question, his first question is how to handle session 0. What kind of expectations do you need to set? How much input should DMs have in character creation? So that depends on what you want to do as a DM. You might be in a situation like mine where you've created a setting or whatever where kind of anything goes, where you can say, hey, anything in the player's handbook is fair game, any class, any race, whatever. But if what you're wanting to do does have any restrictions, you definitely want to let the players know during session 0. Things like, are there certain races that aren't available? Are there certain classes that aren't available? Are there certain alignments that aren't available? Like, another thing I should have told my players at the very beginning is, hey, by the way, no evil alignments. Luckily for me, I don't think anybody was making an evil character, but I didn't even until much later in the session 0 say, oh, by the way, no evil alignments. Which, if someone had already had a concept that involved being evil, that would have been a problem, right? So as far as, how much input should DMs have in character creation, that really depends on you and how specific of an idea you have for your campaign, right? So, I've seen the whole spectrum from, DMs where you come in and they're like, make whatever you want, it doesn't matter, and it'll work, to DMs that are like, there's only these classes available, there's only these races available. It just depends on the campaign you want to run. So I guess a first step for a GM before you even go to session 0 is to think about that and think about, are there any character options that won't work in what I want to do, so that you can let the players know? Or on the other side, are there any options that I really need someone to take? Like, for my campaign to work, someone has to be a cleric of this particular deity, because that's a big part of the campaign, is things involving this deity. So that kind of stuff. So there's not like a one size fits all answer. It depends on your DMing style, how comfortable you are improving and reacting to what the players come up with, versus how defined of an idea do you already have in mind, where you want to put some limitations on what the players make. Because it's definitely better to tell them before they start thinking about characters, and definitely before they start actually making the character, because it's a lot easier for a player to swallow, okay, no one can be a divine caster, before they've even really thought about what they want to play, than after they've already decided they want to play a cleric, or they've already made a cleric, and now you're like, oh, sorry, you can't be a cleric, right? So, and then Josh says, how much do I need to communicate to the players to get everyone on the same page and adventuring without making it drudgery? And again, that's going to depend on how specific your campaign is, how many of those limitations exist. Also, it's going to depend on how well you know your players, right? If you're playing with people that you've gamed with for years, then you may not have to explain a whole lot. You may just be able to say, oh, this is going to be similar to the last campaign we did, or, hey, here's a few changes from last time, and that's it. But if you're playing with people you've never played before, or not very much, then you might have to tell them more about where you're coming from. So Josh, I hope I answered your questions. If not, feel free to follow up with me, and we'll keep this going. So next, I heard from Thomas Chapman on Google Plus, who made a great post talking about how he kind of approaches game mastering a little bit differently than I do, based on his background, which was really cool. And if you want to read that in its entirety, it's on the Game Master's Journey Google Plus group, the post for episode 68. So Thomas says, thinking back to what I needed when I started, the big thing was permission to bend the rules to make things fun for the players. Are battles a slog? Throw out the last few parts. Do the players really enjoy the fighting? Then keep it going with, maybe giving the monsters more XP or more hit points behind the screen, things like that. My players have fallen in love with the 5th edition downtime rules. It took until this podcast for me to realize I could steal from other systems. So yeah, that's a really good point. I definitely agree that for the most part, fun should come before the rules. I think, one exception to that is keeping things fair and balanced, and again, if you kind of think about it, it kind of comes back to fun. So maybe you have one player who is asking you to bend or change certain rules so that they can do certain things. And if you agree to that, is going to result in their character being much more powerful than the other characters. Well, that might be really fun for that particular player, but it may not be so much fun for the other people, the other players at the table. And it may not be so much fun for you as the GM, because now, you have to try to come up with encounters that will, on the one hand, challenge the uber powered player character, while on the other hand, not completely killing all the other player characters, which can be a real headache. And, just as an aside, back in the 2nd edition days, I was all about house ruling everything in sight. And I had all kinds of changes that I made to the system. Ironically, some of them later became part of D&D, like the whole idea of having cantrips that you can just cast as many times as you want. I did that in 2nd edition. I had all cantrips were like that in 2nd edition. And I think the first time we saw that was either 3rd edition or Pathfinder. I don't remember, but definitely in 5th edition, your cantrips you can cast as many times as you want. So anyway, I guess it's not really totally relevant. But my point is I made house rules all over the place. And when I started running 3rd edition, I started doing the same thing. And a lesson that I learned is that for the most part, any house rule that you make ends up making more work for you as the GM running the game. And that's especially true in a game like D&D or Pathfinder. For instance, in D&D, there's this whole system for building balanced encounters, right? If you start changing rules like how many attribute points people get to build their character, or what kind of bonuses they get, or even giving them magic items earlier than is recommended, it starts to skew the power balance between the PCs and everything else in the game. And you can get to a point where designing encounters becomes a lot more difficult because your PCs are outside of the system as far as how they're balanced with it. So you can't use the recommendations in the DMG for building encounters because they no longer apply, because your characters are not within the system anymore, if that makes sense. So the DMG might say, okay, if you're a level 4 party, they can handle this many challenged 3 creatures and this many challenged 2 creatures. And if you follow the rules, then that's going to work for you. But if you're giving the PCs all these bonuses that they wouldn't normally get, then that's not going to be challenging enough anymore. And you're going to have to figure out how to adjust that. Or on the other side of the spectrum, if you're not giving PCs all the things that they should have because you think they'd be too powerful, then it's going to be too difficult of an encounter compared with what you think it will be based on what the DMG is telling you, right? So I just learned that it's a lot easier to run things by the book as much as you can, at least until you've really mastered the system and you're in a position where you can really know when you make a change how much of a pain that's going to be for you in the long run. And then you can decide if it's worth it or not. So, it's something to keep in mind. I definitely agree that if there's some rule or mechanic that is in the way of people having fun, and it's not something that's going to result in one PC outshining another PC, or the PCs as a whole outshining the rest of the system, then I'd say go for it. But again, for a new GM, I would recommend learning the system as it is, whatever system you're playing, and master that before you start screwing with it, because chances are really good that before you have that mastery, any changes that you make are going to have unforeseen consequences, and you're just going to be putting out fires for the rest of the campaign, or you're going to end up retconning the thing that you did. So I would really recommend, as far as the mechanics go and making sweeping house rule changes, like this is the way this works in my game now that's different from the system, I wouldn't do it as a new GM. But if you're in a situational thing, or a situation where a player just wants to do like a one-time thing that either they can't do by the rules or the rules don't cover that or whatever, don't be afraid to just do it on the fly and do what's fun. But I would caution against making sweeping changes that are going to affect anything beyond that moment until you really have the system down. And Thomas's next point about battles is a really good point, and just in general, kind of trying to keep an eye on what the players enjoy, what they don't enjoy. And I know I've done it more than once with my Tyranny of Dragons campaign, where we're in these stupid chump encounters that aren't really a threat, don't really matter. It's just a way to tap resources and eat up time. And I'm bored with it. I can tell the players are bored with it. And so I'll be like, you know what? Let's just say that you guys defeat these guys and move on, because we know what's going to happen. You guys are going to win. We don't need to sit here and roll dice for half an hour doing something that we don't find fun to get to the point that we all know we're going to arrive at anyway. Let's just skip that and say you guys won and move on. And, like Thomas says, on the other side of the spectrum, if your players are really enjoying a battle, you can try to draw it out if you want. Now, I would definitely recommend against doing that all the time and or even doing it very often, because if you're one of those GMs where you're like, oh, they're going to kill my evil creature too fast, so I'm just going to give it 20 more hit points, and you do that a lot, your players are going to figure that out, right? And it's really irritating when a GM does that, because you feel like, like, for instance, if you're playing a fighter and you go into this combat with a dragon or whatever, and you crit maybe a few times and you do all this crazy damage that no one expected that you would do, I think you should get the satisfaction of what would have been a very difficult encounter becoming even an easy encounter because you got lucky and rolled some crits. Like, that's part of the game, and you should get to enjoy that satisfaction as a player. The GM shouldn't rob you of that because he wanted this epic encounter that would last 10 rounds and basically remove the impact of those crits that you got, that kind of thing. So, everything is, you can't take things in a vacuum, right? And everything is situational. And so, the general idea of, if the PCs are enjoying the battle and there's a way you can kind of draw it out, then that's a good thing to do. I agree with that as a general statement. However, you got it. There's a lot of other things to consider, right? So if that battle is going to be short because a PC got some crits or a PC did something really ingenious that gave them an edge, then I think you should let them have that easy victory and let them enjoy the consequences of their good decisions or their good luck. Just like on the other side, if they had bad decisions or bad luck, you would let them suffer those consequences as well, whether that's a character going down or a character dying or whatever. If you as a GM are going to get in the way of the consequences, good or bad, of what the players do, then even though you may think you're doing it to quote unquote make the game more fun, what you're really doing is robbing the players of their agency. And as a GM, you control everything in the world except the player characters. So you want to be really careful stepping on player agency, because when you think about it, the players don't have a lot of control over much of anything in the game, and you as a GM have all the control. And some GMs will give players more or less control, but at the very least they should have control of their characters, which means if they roll a crit and it would fairly kill the bad evil guy, then it should kill the bad evil guy. Which also means if they fail a save and it would mean their character dies, then their character should die. That's the game. And if you take that away, it's no longer a game, it's just mental masturbation. And that might be fun for you as a GM, but it's not going to be fun for your players in the long run once they figure out what's going on. All right, getting off that soapbox. And yeah, Thomas makes the point of, you can steal from other systems, and that's definitely true. So if you're someone who has exposure to multiple game systems and you've decided you're going to run this particular game, feel free to take ideas from other games that you like. Now, again, I'll give the caution of messing with mechanics before you've really mastered the system. So I wouldn't grab mechanics from other systems until you really know what you're doing, but you can grab ideas. So for instance, if you're running D&D and you're brand new and you look at 13th Age and you're like, oh, I really like the escalation die. Well, I wouldn't just throw that in the D&D, because as a new DM, you have no idea what kind of an impact that's going to have on your game. As someone who's been running 5th edition for almost a year now, I'm not entirely sure what kind of an impact that would have on the game. But personally, I don't feel that the possible benefits of adding that are worth the possible drawbacks of adding it. And just the fact that, well, we won't really know until we try it. And if it fucks everything up, then we've got to deal with it, right? But if you want to take like an idea from 13th Age of what John Marvin talked about a few episodes ago with the montages, and saying, okay, I'm having the players travel across this wilderness and I have a few encounters I want to run, but other than that, I don't want to just do a slog of random encounters. So instead, I'm going to do the montage thing like John and I talked about when he was on the show, which is where, you know, you turn to one character or one player and you say, what's a obstacle that you faced on the journey? And then they come up with something. And then you turn to the next player and say, how did you overcome that obstacle? And you go around the table until everybody's come up with an obstacle and everyone's come up with a solution. And then that's the encounters they had on the way. And then go for it, because that has no mechanical effect, right? Because you're not going to give them XP for that. So it's not going to change anything mechanically with the game. It's a storytelling device. So things like that, definitely feel free to grab from other games. Absolutely. So Thomas says, also not getting caught up in world building. Knowing it will happen somewhat naturally was a very long lesson. The basics are all you need in the beginning. And I totally agree with that too. I have a whole series of episodes where I talk about world building specifically. And when it comes to world building, there are two basic approaches or philosophies. The approach that I was most familiar with and was the way I thought it was done for a long time is where you build the whole world. And then once you have everything figured out, then you start running adventures in it. So you start at like the macro level of here's this planet, here are the continents, here are the nations, you know, here are the religions and all this, and you come up with all this stuff, right? And then you start running games. The other approach is starting small and saying, okay, like me, I'm starting my game in the city of Alondria. So I'm going to come up with some stuff about Alondria, and not the whole city. I haven't built the whole city. I basically have a tiny little section of the city that I have some idea what's there, and that's it, because that's where the players are. And just build what you need as you go. I'm a huge proponent for the second method. I think the first method may work for some people, but I would posit that even for those people that it works for, it's still going to end up with that GM sitting by themselves for weeks or months world building before they can have their friends over and run a game. And personally, I think it's a lot more fun to play an RPG with my friends than to sit all by myself world building. So I would much rather use the second method, get enough down that I can get started with the players and then be building as we go. Now, there are pros and cons to that, which I'm starting to see this in my game I'm running now. You know, the pros are, like I said, you can start running right away. You don't have to wait 6 months or a year of world building before you can start playing the game. Another big pro is if you're open to it, you can have the players help you with the world building, which is what I plan to do. So, you know, if I'm in Alondria and we're at the fucking Pint, which is a tavern/inn in Alondria, and a player says, well, what's a block over? If I have some idea, I might be like, oh, well, there's this, this, and this a block over. But if I don't know, I'll be like, well, I don't know. What do you think should be a block over? Or what do you want to be a block over? And then as a group around the table, we discuss and come up with some ideas. Because chances are, if that player asks me what's a block over, that player wants something, right? That player has an idea, and they're hoping I'm going to say, oh, there's an antique shop a block over, or there's whatever, right? Like they have an idea and they're hoping I'm going to say something. So why not, you know, cut through the bullshit and just say, well, what do you want? And the player's like, oh, I'd really like an antique shop because I want to go do this thing. It's like, sure, there's an antique shop. What, you know, and then we start fleshing out what's the antique shop like? What's the shop owner like? And, you know, the old way of thinking was, oh, the DM has to do all this, right? And you can, but, you know, I would submit that ideas that are derived by a group of people working together are going to be way better than ideas that one person comes up with, if only because there'll be more variety, right? So, you know, I think it's not only easier and more fun, but you're going to end up with a better setting if you let your players help. And so I see that as a big pro of starting small and building out as you need it, because then you can let the players help you define things in the world instead of them showing up to the table and you're like, oh, everything's defined, everything's carved in stone. If you don't like it, too bad, right? So like, for instance, I've said on the show before, and it's funny how much this comes back to me, but I've said on the show before that I'm not a huge fan of gnomes, right? Like, I don't like gnomes. I just don't find them interesting. I find them like this kind of generic something between an elf and a halfling that I feel like we don't need, or at the very least we need to do something interesting with them. Like in Pathfinder, I like gnomes. Like Pathfinder was like, gnomes are boring and they're not very developed in D&D, so let's do something interesting with them, and they have the bleaching and whatnot, and that was really cool. I'm like, there you go, that's how you do gnomes right. So it'd be very easy for me to just build a world and say there are no gnomes because I think gnomes are dumb, right? But then if I have a player that's all about gnomes, that player can't play a gnome, right? Which is lame. But instead, if I'm like, well, it's undefined, it's gray mist, and there are gnomes, but I don't really know anything about the gnomes because I don't care about gnomes, so I haven't developed it. But then I have a player that's all about gnomes. I can be like, well, I tell you what, buddy, you love gnomes. You tell me about the gnomes. What are the gnomes like? What's their culture like? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do they have a city somewhere? What's that like? And let the player who loves gnomes come up with that stuff. And that player is going to have a ball coming up with that stuff because they love gnomes. Like me, I love elves. So if I was in a D&D homebrew world and the DM was like, I'm not a huge fan of elves, so I haven't done anything with them, but if you have some ideas, I'd love to hear them. Like I would give the DM like a thesis on elves and all these different ideas of what he could do with elves, right? So I think that's a huge pro with starting small and working out when it comes to world building. Now the con is you're going to find yourself in situations where you don't have anything, right? So it's like the situation I was talking about earlier with my players last night, where they're like, we want to do a city campaign. And I'm like, oh, fuck. I mean, first of all, I'm not a huge fan of city campaigns myself. I find them boring. It's too much like real life. Like I'd much rather tell a story where you're out in the wilderness encountering crazy monsters and weird fairies and all this stuff, or on another plane. Like I'd much rather do something like that than, oh, you're in a city. To me, that's just boring, so that's part of it. But part of it is, another part of it is city stuff tends to involve a lot of politics and intrigue, which I'm A, not really into, and B, not at all good at, probably because I'm not into it, right? So that's part of it. And the other part was, well, to really do that, I feel like I need a much better fleshed out city than what I have now, right? I need lots of NPCs that are really well developed for the PCs to interact with. I need some organizations. I need to know how the government works and is there a thieves guild or multiple thieves guilds and all this stuff I don't have. So it's like I'm in a position where I either say, no, we're not going to do that, or I say, we're going to do it, but we're going to either have to not do it for a while I world build, or we're going to have to not start the campaign while I world build and flesh all this stuff out that we need, or just be like, hey guys, I'm going to need your help with this because there's a lot of world building to do for this to work, and maybe this is something we can do as a group. Right, which is kind of the approach I'm going to take. Is I'm going to tell them, it may not be the first adventure because we need some foundation built, but I've already started thinking more about the city in preparation for this, and I'm going to present to the players the idea of, hey, why don't you guys help me come up with stuff, and then it's that much faster that we can have enough that we can do this thing that you guys all want to do, and yeah, so that's a possible downside. But I think, you can kind of turn it into an upside, right? Because like I'm actually kind of excited, even though I don't feel that I do politics and intrigue and city stuff well, and I'm not personally a huge fan of it. I'm excited because I'm excited about my city, and this is an opportunity for me to really flesh out my city. And honestly, probably come up with a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have come up with otherwise. It's like they say, necessity is the mother of invention. So if I don't have something pushing me to flesh out the city more, maybe it never would become fleshed out more, or maybe it would just take a long time, right? But now it's a priority now, and I'm kind of excited about that because I'm like, oh, hey, we get to flesh out Alondria and know much more about it. So just in less than 24 hours, I've gone from deer in headlights, oh my God, this is frightening, I don't want to do it, to I'm kind of excited about this now. And, as long as I don't have to do it all myself, I think we can come up with something pretty cool, because I have a lot of creative people in my group, and I'm really excited to see, what people want to do and what they come up with. So I completely agree with Thomas, especially as a new GM, do not get caught up in world building. In fact, honestly, as a new GM, I would recommend take an established setting if there is one for your game. So, if you're doing D&D 5th edition, just take the Forgotten Realms. It's so fucking easy. Everything's Forgotten Realms now. And just take what you like and throw out what you don't like. Do not feel like you have to be canon Forgotten Realms or whatever setting you pick. Just say, I'm going to just steal from this left and right, and we're going to use, Waterdeep, and we're going to use the Sword Coast, and we're going to use all that stuff. But anytime I see something I don't like, I'm just going to cut it out and put in something different. And in a way, if you think about it, you're building your own world, because it's not going to be the canon Forgotten Realms after very long if you give yourself the freedom to do that. And then later, once you're comfortable as a GM and you're sure this is something you want to do, and you feel more comfortable running games and preparing adventures, then you can start building your own world, and you can still steal everything from your Forgotten Realms that you liked and put it in your world, which is what I'm doing. I mean, that's exactly what I did when I started in high school. Well, actually, I did a little Dragonlance at first, but mainly once I got into Forgotten Realms, that's all I did. And I changed things left and right. I used what I liked, threw out what I didn't like. And now that I'm building my own world, a lot of those things that I came up with for my Forgotten Realms, I'm moving over. And I'm also, stealing things from the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide for Forgotten Realms that I like. Because why the hell not? I'll also steal from Lord of the Rings or Conan or anything else that I see that I like, that I'm like, this would be cool in Primordia. I'm stealing it. That's what creatives do. They just steal ideas. You can't copyright an idea, thank God. So don't be afraid to steal ideas. And, finally, Thomas says scope, as dealt with in this podcast and in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, I always thought too big. And I did that too. Thinking that you need the equivalent of the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting done on your world before you can run in it. I mean, that's total BS. Don't fall for that. You don't need that. All right. So next we have Brian Earhart emailed me, and he says, "Hi Lex, been wanting to write you for a while." He says, "I found your YouTube channel while looking for Princes of the Apocalypse playthroughs. I think I watched all of Horde of the Dragon Queen and Princes of the Apocalypse over about 2.5 months. Wow, that's a lot of stuff to watch. Who needs scripted TV?" It's great stuff. Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Great DM. Well, thank you. I'm not sure I agree with you, but I am very happy that you think I'm a great DM. I wish I was. Wonderful players. That I agree with. I appreciate the hard work you do making this available online. Thank you. You're welcome. I'm happy to do it. I'm just amazed and humbled that people actually watch our sessions. That's pretty cool. I also enjoy the Game Master's Journey podcast. I like it how sometimes it serves as a running commentary on what's going on in the Thursday night game. That's awesome. I like that you like that, Brian, because sometimes I wonder if people even want to hear that stuff. He goes on to say Primordia is fantastic. Wish you hadn't killed Yorick. Uh-oh, spoiler. Whoops. I didn't kill Yorick. The NPCs killed Yorick. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting aside. So I run this campaign on Roll20, and in the very beginning, when we started Tyranny of Dragons, I asked the players, I said, there's 2 ways we can go here. I can make all the rolls public, which means when I roll, on Roll20, when I roll dice, everybody sees what I rolled. It's like there's no screen on a tabletop game, right? There's no DM screen. Everybody sees what I roll. Or I can make my rolls secret, just like if I was rolling behind the DM screen and you don't know what I'm rolling, right? So the upside to them being public is, I'm not cheating. The downside is what happens, right? If I roll something that's going to kill your character, well, your character's going to die because you all saw that. I can't fudge it without anybody knowing, right? So everybody unanimously decided that they wanted public rolls. So because of that, there have been times when characters have died or have nearly died, where if the rolls would have been secret, like if I would have been running a tabletop campaign and I was rolling behind the screen, I probably would have fudged it. I probably would have had the character instead, be unconscious and get a horrific injury or something like that. But because the roll was public, I couldn't do that, because if I did, then there goes all the tension in the game, because then people will just assume that anytime someone's character is going to die, I'm going to cheat so that they don't die. And then either that happens and there's just no tension in the game, or then I don't do that and then someone has hurt feelings because I saved Dwayne's character, but I didn't save Nathan's character, right? So, that's something to consider when you're running a game. Do you want your roles to be private or public? So, I didn't kill York. The dice killed York. He says he was looking forward to seeing what mischief Dwayne was going to get into with him. Yeah, I was too. I really liked that character. I really liked the demon father, and his father was the orc demon lord Slarg, and I was really looking forward to that. I was really sad when those characters died. I really liked Chrissy's character with, the angelic parent, and exploring that. I was looking forward to exploring that. I really enjoyed all the characters. I was looking forward to seeing how the Scion played out with Nathan's character, with seeing how the Blade Singer played out with Steve's character, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. And I did give the players the option of rewinding the campaign, and everybody decided that they'd rather make new characters. Let's see, where were we? Brian's email. He says, I agree with what you said about published campaigns. I enjoy reading them, but by the time I get towards the end, they feel suffocating. And that's just reading them, let alone playing them. Yeah, I completely agree. I guess I'm agreeing with him who's agreeing with me. Kind of narcissistic. Anyway, at any rate, I am answering your call for questions and topics for GM 101. I am really excited about the prospect of this series. I recently got back in touch with my RPG buddies from high school. We are starting a new homebrew campaign, kind of like what the Dice Stormers did with their shared Pathfinder world, where they all pitched in on GMing. That sounds pretty cool. At some point, I expect to run some adventures. The thing that intimidates me most is whether I will be able to think on my feet, be able to come up with a building, a business, or interesting and distinctive NPCs when the players run off the beaten path. And they will run off the beaten path. Yes, that much is for certain. So he says that might be a good topic for the podcast. Thanks again for many hours of entertainment. Well, you are welcome, Brian, and I agree that is a good topic, and I see that this will probably be the last topic for this episode, so I'm going to have to do another feedback episode for GM 101. So, thinking on your feet, coming up with things on the fly, like a building, a business, NPCs. So, I can definitely see why you're intimidated by it. I'm still intimidated by that. That's probably my biggest weakness as a GM, is on the fly stuff like that and making it interesting and vivid and unique. And it's not easy. I will tell you that, like a lot of things, it's a skill. Nobody is just born being good at that. Some of us may have a better natural proclivity to it than others, but we all have to learn. We all have to practice that. And you will get better. The more you do it, the more you push yourself, you will get better. As far as any, advice or help, as far as that goes, I will say that the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition is really great for this. If you're willing to, when you're running a game and something like this happens, you need to come up with something. If you're willing to say, hey, give me a minute and go to the Dungeon Master's Guide, there are tables upon tables for generating NPCs, buildings in a city, all kinds of stuff. So that's one option. If you're playing D&D or another game that has tools like that, is you can use those tables for inspiration. You can just generate something randomly using the tables, that kind of thing. So that's one thing you can do to help yourself. And this is something, here's a piece of advice that I don't follow that I wish I would remember to do this when I'm running a game. When you hit a moment as a game master, something happens and you don't know what to do, whether it's a PC just did something and you don't know how to react, or they want to know what's in a building and you're not sure, or anything like that, do not be afraid to call for a break. Say, hey, let's take 5. People can go to the bathroom. People can refill their drinks. People can, check their messages on their phone, or, whatever. Just talk about stuff, preferably game related or in character if they're going to stay in the room. And just take some time to figure out what the NPC is going to do next, or figure out who this NPC is, or what's in the building, or whatever you need to figure out. I don't know that I've ever done this. I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to keep the game going and keep the pace. And I don't know if I've ever done that where something came up, I wasn't sure what to do, and I said, hey, let's take a break, let me figure this out. I really wish I would. I really wish when that happens, I would remember to do that, because instead what I do is just come up with something lame, and it would be much better, I think, for the game for me to take 5 minutes, let everybody take a break, and come up with something a bit better than just on the fly coming up with something lame. So that's my other piece of advice is don't be afraid to take a break if you need to, or even end the session if it's something really big, like you thought you were going to do a campaign in your city or an adventure, and they leave the city and you have no idea what's outside the city. If you have to, be like, hey, I wasn't ready for this, so I'm fine with it, but I'm going to need to end the session here, and we'll pick up next week, and then I have time to come up with stuff. And chances are good, if you do that the PCs or the players will be like, you know what, that's cool, but we don't want to stop playing, so let's do some more stuff in the city, and then we'll plan on next week leaving the city. Usually they'll be cool like that, But worst case scenario, you just end a little early, and you're ready for that next time. But yeah, until you're really comfortable and good at thinking on your feet, don't think on your feet unless you absolutely have to. Take a break. Take 5 and come up with something. And while you're taking 5, use any tables that you have access to help you if you don't have any ideas. And my last suggestion for this is turn it back around on the players. If they want to know what's in the building and you've got nothing, ask them, what do you think is in the building, or what do you want to be in the building? And as a group, figure it out. There's this kind of what now is seeming like this outdated mode of thinking where everything's on the GM's shoulders to come up with everything. And you can run a game like that, but it's a lot harder on the GM, and I think it's less fun for everybody. I think you're going to get more buy-in from the players if they can be more involved with the setting and the world building and things like that. So when something comes up and you're not sure whether it's an NPC or a building, or just something that you need to come up with on the fly, what the name of the ship is that they're on or whatever, ask the players. Don't be afraid. It's not a failure on your part as GM to say, I don't have any great ideas. What do you guys think? It's the opposite. That's awesome, because your players are going to dig that. They're going to enjoy, I think, a lot of them at least, will enjoy having that opportunity to come up with stuff themselves. They get to be little GMs for a while, It's like being an uncle, right? You get all the joys of having a kid without any of the bad things, because when you get sick of them, you just give them back to their parents. It's the same thing if you have a GM that does it this way. As a player, you get to create things just like a GM would from time to time, but you don't have to do it. And, it's not your responsibility to do it. So you don't have to every week, have shit ready. But, during the session when the GM asks for stuff, you can do it. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And I guess if you're a GM, if you're an experienced GM, consider doing that if you don't already. Another upside to that is, I know some groups are in a situation where there's one person that always runs games and they're the only one that does. And sometimes that can be hard on the GM because you feel like you always have to run and you never get to play. And if you're in a situation like that, do more of this, allowing the players to create things during the session, because it gives them a chance to get some practice at doing GMing type things. And you never know, there might be a player that really takes a shine to it and realizes that they really enjoy creating stuff. And now they want to run a game, and now you get to play for a while. So that could be cool too. All right, so I am going to stop this here. I've gotten about halfway through the comments and questions I had. Probably by the time I do another one of these, I'll have even more, but that's great. I really didn't anticipate getting this much feedback so quickly and topics that we can really spend some time with. So I was thinking I was going to have to come up with like a syllabus, like I was saying before. But I really like this. I really like hearing from you what you want to know and then talk about it. And so, if you have a question or something you'd like to hear me talk about regarding the GM 101 stuff, shoot me an email, gamemastersjourney@gmail.com, if I could talk straight. Or if you have a follow-up question or comment on what I discussed today. Let's keep this going. It's a great discussion. All right, well, that is going to wrap up episode 70 of Game Master's Journey. If you'd like to reach me, email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Find me on Google+, just search for Lex Starwalker, and follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker. Visit my website, starwalkerstudios.com, to find the show notes where you can find links about things I talk about on the show. You can find my other podcasts. You can find links to my Patreon page if you'd like to support the show. Donate button if you'd like to make a donation, iTunes and Stitcher buttons if you'd like to subscribe or leave a review, all that good stuff. Also, at the bottom of the show notes, you can sign up for the newsletter and receive at most one email a month from me about what's going on with the podcast and the studio. You can find links to my YouTube channel if you want to watch some of my games. 30-day trial of Audible books, courtesy of Game Master's Journey. Amazon referral link. If you shop on Amazon, please use that link to get to Amazon, and will definitely help me out here at Starwalker Studios. And at the top of the show notes, you can find a big red Google Plus button for our Google Plus community. Really hope you join us there, and it's a great way to connect with other gamers. I hope you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week, and I hope that you seriously consider becoming a game master yourself. It's a lot of fun. I will be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.